Here's the curveball. Most abandoned Roman towns weren't torched overnight. They were edited, downsized, repurposed. The paradox kicks in fast. While marble forums went quiet and dry fountains turned to echo bowls, the life didn't vanish. It moved to walled core-only neighborhoods, to hill-fort hamlets where smoke from hearths spelled safer here, to markets tucked under church eaves. Myth versus reality? Less apocalypse, more long, steady urban contraction. Tonight you'll feel the ground-level truth. We'll walk silent colonnades that became workshops, touch moss-softened stones that remember lawsuits. And now shelter looms, and hear the bell over shattered marble call, both mass and market. Quick win first. You'll learn 3 simple reasons places emptied out. Water systems failing, taxes and security wobbling, and trade routes choosing rivers over broken roads. And how those pressures produced late antique deurbanization that was messy, human, and strangely practical. This isn't doom-scrolling in toga cosplay. It's a tour of resilience. You'll see ruins reused like a survival language, deserted forums turning into goat paths by day, and processional routes by feast, and civic memory rewritten on parchment, when law stepped off marble. We'll weigh what was truly forsaken against what was just reduced to hamlets and stitched back together by fairs, bridges and charters. If you're here for human texture, you're in the right place. Expect dry hands on cold stone, the clink of teaspoons in repurposed basilicas, and the faint breath of vinegar at dawn as lanes get scrubbed. Expect odd protocols, why goats on paving were sometimes policy, and hard choices, why a bathhouse became grain storage. By the end, you'll be able to read a ruin like a ledger. His kind of honest atmospheric history hits the spot. Tap like and subscribe, so you don't miss the rest of the series. And drop a comment. Where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Your pin on the map helps me time the next bell. You arrive on a cool morning, and the city sounds wrong. The colonnade is still there, but it's a silent colonnade. Pigeons ruling capitals where magistrates once stood tall. The dry fountains are bowls of dust, their rims green with time. Broken tiles crack under your boots like old pottery. In the forum a few stalls cling on, yet most benches sit deserted, sun-warmed and purposeless. This isn't theatrical ruin, it's the beginning of post-Roman urban decline, slow, practical, nearly polite. Think less apocalypse, more nobody's fixing the aqueduct and everyone's late to work. Here's the myth versus reality you need to hold. Cities didn't implode overnight when emperors stopped answering their mail. They shrunk. Walls inched inward. The people you'd expect to see, clerks, lawyers, the fishmonger who knows your father's credit, moved house to the walled core only, closer to walled core only, closer to water they could maintain, and gates they could shut. Workshops slid into porticos, and deserted forums became shortcut paths for kids and goats. What you're seeing is urban contraction, a civic organism curling up for warmth. Archaeologists call it late antique deurbanization, but you can just call it making do. Baths dry up, so a smith sets up his forge in a tepidarium. The basilica swaps civic lawsuits for liturgy as a bishop hangs a bell over shattered marble. Roof beams from a derelict warehouse get transplanted into 3 sturdy cottages. This is ruins reused, spolia as a survival strategy, not a design trend. The hollowed-out civitas keeps breathing, only in a different register. Follow the water, and you'll feel the story in your bones. Once, an aqueduct purred. The city limps on wells and cisterns that silt faster than anyone wants to clean. Without pressure, fountains go dry, and plazas go emptied out. Moss sneaks across steps. Moss softened stones where sandals once clicked. The old market drifts from the deserted forum to the churchyard, because that's where the crowd still gathers. Your nose catches damp mortar, cold ash, and wool, life moving to smaller rooms. Security flips the map. Raiders don't need to conquer, they only need to scare accounting. Households shift to nearby heights where palisades are cheaper than marble, and you see smoke from hill-fort hearths curling over the ridge by dusk. The old town isn't abandoned yet, but it's reduced to hamlets stitched between monuments. You hear a mule's bell, and then the church bell, a new soundscape ringing over shattered marble. The city learned to flinch, and then to settle. Money loses its manners. Fewer caravans, thinner tax flows, coin clipped to nubs. Smiths start melting bronze statues. Nobody is paying to polish. A civitas can't afford fountains when it can barely pay watchmen. Some houses go forsaken. Others get split with Wattle and Daub, two families where one patrician dined. You smile at a flock of goats on paving stones, chewing weeds between ruts. Apparently they didn't read the dedication plaque. They're city maintenance now. 4 stomachs, 0 bureaucracy. Power changes chairs. The curial class that once ran councils goes rural, hiding on estates with thicker kitchens and fewer creditors. A bishop steps into the vacuum, turning a walled core into a parish and the bathhouse into alms storage. The city becomes a necklace. Gate, church, granary, gate, stringing together what still functions. The Grand Theatre sits derelict, yet its stone props up a stout tower, the ruins reused to keep the winter out more reliably than old laws. Trade doesn't die, it detours. River quays bustle on good weeks while the seafront sulks. Markets pop up outside the walls on feast days and vanish at the rumour of riders. A plague's whisper or a colder season nudges families to cousins' farms, but the town doesn't empty out entirely. Many places become ghost towns only on festival mornings, lively on Thursdays, depopulated at night. It's messy, uneven, human. Abandoned Roman towns are rarely truly abandoned. They're edited. Walk the lanes and listen with your shoes. Your heel taps broken tiles patching a threshold. Your palm brushes moss-softened stones where vines knit the past to the present. A Phalonicus stink is gone. In its place, bread, someone turned vats into ovens. Under a colonnade, wool merchants bargain in low voices. On the deserted forum, a child drags a stick through dust like drawing new street plans. The air tastes of smoke and boiled grain and relief. If you were in charge here, congratulations, you're not. You'd be doing math with your heart. Which gates can you man? Which roofs leak least? How many silent colonnades can become workshops before pride complains? You'd hire anyone with mortar on their boots and bless anyone who can fix a cistern. You tear down a little to build up a lot, stacking broken tiles into weatherproof mosaics only birds admire. Leadership becomes triage with a kind voice. And the people? They improvise identity. A city once proud of marble inscriptions now boasts of bread lines that never fail, and walls that don't fall in the rain. A derelict nymphaeum becomes a sheep pen by winter. Come summer, it's a stage for gossip. The hollowed-out civitas still hosts weddings, funerals, processions, just shorter routes and thicker shoes. If you look up, laundry blinks between capitals like flags of quiet victory. So no, the Middle Ages didn't roll in like a curtain. They seeped in like water through a hairline crack, then froze, then widened. Piece by piece, the city folded its wings, guarded its core, and learned the art of small. And just as you're getting used to the forsaken elegance, you'll notice a new kind of wall rising from rubble, thicker, lower, studded with carved fragments, hinting at the next chapter will open. Who built these? What they feared, and how a town that once spoke marble learned to speak timber, tile, and bell. Start by running your hand along a wall that shouldn't exist. It's thick for a townhouse and too lumpy for Roman pride. Every face a collage of carved fragments, cornices shoved sideways, altar stones flipped, capitals hammered flat. That's ruins reused turning into a rampart, the practical language of fear. In post-Roman urban decline, you fortify first and beautify never. Sculptors become quarrymen, and theology becomes mortar. From the road you see a town that once bragged in marble, now bracing in rubble, guarding a walled core only while the suburbs go quiet. You can hear why it happened if you listen between the birds. The long peace cracked, toll roads dried up, and soldiers started asking for back pay with swords. Myth versus reality. It wasn't one barbarian thunderclap. It was years of bad weather, thin taxes, and maybe next season, repairs until watchmen stopped smiling. So people pulled inward. Houses stitched to gates, alleys kinked into traps, corners turned into arrow slits. The urban contraction you felt in the forum becomes geometry that can fight back at midnight. Walk the new circuit and you'll smell sweat cooked into lime. A bishop's men carry baskets. A blacksmith's apprentices drag broken tiles to cap the parapet. Children fetch water and collect stories they'll tell for decades. That arch over your head? Yesterday it was a theatre exit. Today it's gate of Saint whatever, because a saint's name shuts mouths faster than a magistrator's. A bell over shattered marble rings a workday to a close, and for a heartbeat the place feels less forsaken and more ingenious. Gates are no longer welcome mats, they're contracts. At dawn they open with a groan, at dusk they close with finality, and everything in between is surveillance disguised as hospitality. Traders queue with cartwheels tilted, so the guard can peek under sacks. Priests stroll like breeze, yet even they know the new timetable. Inside the walls, the hollowed-out civitas concentrates. Bakers near the gate, smiths near the tower, granaries where cool air still remembers aqueducts. Deserted forums become parade grounds only for emergencies and sheep. Towers grow where statues once pointed at philosophy. Climb one, and the landscape explains the policy. Villas reduced to hamlets dot the fields, smoke pricking the sky from hill-fort hearths on ridges that once merited poetry, not palisades. The big wide Roman map has folded into valleys and river bends. What you can defend you keep. What you can't, goats keep. And yes, you will see goats on paving stones nibbling basil in the portico like unpaid gardeners. That scruffy wall you just admired is also a filing cabinet of ghosts. Spot the upside-down inscription about some forgotten duovere. Trace your fingers over moss-softened stones that once listened to court cases. A child asks why Jupiter's face is in the corner by the drain. You answer, because drains matter more than thunder here. The town has learned to prioritize. Thicker doors, narrower streets, and a watch schedule pinned to the church. Walled core only, but awake. Security doesn't just change stone. It rewrites time. Curfew is a new Roman sundial, measured by the bell over shattered marble and the length of a sermon. Night watchmen carry horns and a list of names. Dawn brings markets inside the gate, so the count of loaves matches the count of mouths. The dry fountains glare like retired officers, and you catch the way people glance toward the parapet when a dog barks. Nerves are part of the architecture now. Let's talk budgeting without making you yawn. Money moves like a limping mule, so builders pay in favors and leftover bronze, and masons are paid in wheat weight to a moral kilogram. Marble is a currency too. Pry it out, flip it, stack it, because stone that once posed now works. The derelict baths donate bricks. The amphitheater volunteers stair blocks. Even the silent colonnades get pulled into service, their shafts soared into stumpy bollards that stop carts from smashing the new gates. Religion keeps morale glued while the mortar cures. Processions snake the wall line, blessing fresh-laid courses and the hands that laid them, and the hymn sounds superb under the echo of recycled arches. The bishop preaches myth versus reality straight. God is our bulwark, and also this bulwark is our bulwark. You feel the crowd agree. Piety doesn't replace carpentry, it caffeinates it. And suddenly, the ghost towns in your head look less spooky when a choir practices on the battlements. Meanwhile, the suburbs go to seed with style. Orchard rows creep into atria. Garden plots climb the theatre cavea like polite invaders. Laundry slaps the wind where scrolls once did. The periphery isn't quite abandoned. It's seasonal. Families work there by daylight and tuck back inside by curfew, a tender rhythm you can set your breath to. On days of peace you hear laughter where weeds hide frescoes. On bad days shutters clap and dust pretends to be fog. Does fortifying work? Often enough to make belief a habit. Raiders hate puzzles, and this town is now one big riddle. Blind corners, short sightlines, and neighbors who know each other's bootsteps. Grain lasts longer when it sits behind stone. Gossip spreads faster when everyone queues at one gate. The hollowed-out civitas feels smaller, but small plus steady beats, wide plus emptied out. And the wall's rough face looks a little less desperate each week. If you squint, you'll spot the weird upside. The wall reteaches collaboration. Stonemasons teach bakers how to stack. Bakers teach guards how to read faces. Monks teach everyone how to balance patience with urgency. You catch the scent: wood smoke, clay dust, soup, and realize the town is learning a new recipe for being alive. And just when you think you've understood the fortress, someone wheels a quern toward the old basilica and says, "We're moving the market." That's your hint for the next turn. Once you've built safety, where does the life go? Church, market, manor, or all three at once, braided through moss-softened stones and silent colonnades like a new song, in an old key. Step under the apse, and you'll smell it first. Yeast and incense, a partnership nobody planned. In the basilica that once hosted lawsuits, a stall sells onions beside a reliquary, and the nave hums with barter. That's not sacrilege. It's logistics after post-Roman urban decline. The bishop didn't steal the deserted forum. The forum emptied out, and people followed the bell. So the church becomes thermostat, calendar, and loudspeaker for a hollowed-out civitas that refuses to die politely. You'll see the myth versus reality right away. No, the church didn't ban markets. It moved them where safety, roofs, and witnesses live. A bell over shattered marble rings the opening like a civic gong, and loaves march out under frescoed saints who look mildly interested in grain prices. Clergy track waits the way curials once tracked taxes, pen scratching under silent colonnades that now shelter scales and soap. Render unto Caesar becomes render exact, which is the same sermon with better accounting. Look closer at the floor. Those marble tiles under your feet. Broken tiles relaid into a patchwork, sprinkled with stray letters from a long-gone decree. Ruins reused isn't a vibe. It's a grocery list turned into architecture. A side aisle hosts a shoemaker tapping away where an advocate once argued precedent. The echo is softer, the purpose plainer. If a town is shrinking, it survives by making big rooms do small jobs well. Outside, the dry fountains glare like retired senators. Inside, a cistern keeps market water honest, and you can taste the difference in the soup ladled from a charity bench by the north door. Alms here aren't just piety. They're insurance against riots. Hungry people start fires, fed people fix roofs. You grasp, in your bones, why bishops became mayors. They had the keys to the pantry and the pulpit, the two levers that calm an agitated, depopulated crowd. Relics, oddly, are economic policy with bones. A saint's arm draws pilgrims, and pilgrims draw bakers, cobblers, gossip, and coin. A quarterly fair sprouts around the shrine, like mushrooms after rain. The walled core only pulses on those days, the deserted forum briefly loud again. Even the moss-softened stones seem to sit up straighter when minstrels tune at the porch. You realize holiness in retail, learn to share a bench because roofs leak on everyone equally. Administration doesn't vanish, it changes desk. Where a magistrate once wrote fines, a deacon now writes rations and work rosters, who mends cloaks, who shovels silt from the well, who watches the gate till moonrise. The book is thinner but sharper. This is late antique deurbanization with clipboards. Fewer titles, clearer tasks. Politics here is a broom, not a banner. You can laugh, quietly, at how effective that is. Humor lives under the vaults too. A priest teases a tanner about bringing eau de forum to matins, and everyone breathes through sleeves for a minute. A mother hushes a child who is bargaining with a saint like a shopkeeper. If I get the ribbon, I'll light 2 candles. Light sarcasm keeps dignity from cracking like an old cornice. Cities run on morale as much as on stone. Markets migrate along with the day's weather. Morning trade hugs the basilica's flank. Noon heat pushes stalls beneath those silent colonnades. Dusk sweeps bargains to the gate where guards can count carts. What used to be one plaza is now 3 smaller ones in motion, stitched by bells and habit. You catch the rhythm quickly. Buy early, sell honest, watch the dust line near the apps to tell if rain's coming. Wisdom here is just observation that didn't nap. And the forum? It's not dead. It's repurposed decor. A goat on paving shoes at Time Sprigs, while kids play sanity with pebbles, voting to go home when the shadow reaches a certain slab. On feast days, the bishop may lead a procession across its deserted breadth, incense hitting a breeze that remembers speeches. The air smells like ash, bread, and the perfumed oil, a merchant swears, isn't watered. Much. Trade routes bend but don't break. River folk bring salt and news. Upland shepherds bring cheese and smoke from Hillfort hearths in their cloaks. A sailor hawks shells to children who've never seen a calm sea. The basilica absorbs the chatter and returns it organized. Announcements after compline, lost items pinned near the door, a scribbled note offering strong backs for a roof raising. It's City Hall in sandals. Is this a ghost town? This is a town that downsized its stage and kept the actors. The hollowed-out civitas lives in pockets. Apps Market, Tower Granary, Porch Court, Dottomley Sea. You'll still spot derelict wings and frescoes blinking through soot, but those are chapters, not epitaphs. A heart beats because someone winds it daily with bells and bread. You can hear the pulse if you stand by the door at noon. Your last glance back catches a strange beauty. A choir practicing while a mule sniffs a sack of millet, candle smoke lifting to meet dust motes falling, a child tracing letters on a reused slab while his grandmother prices onions by touch. The city you thought forsaken is writing in a smaller hand now, but the sentences are still warm. And just as you settle into that thought, a runner arrives from the countryside with a message about fields, lords, and rents, dragging us from basilica to barn, from altar to acreage, where the next shape of the city waits in furrows and contracts. You follow the runner out through the gate, and the air changes from incense to hay and damp earth. Out here, the big speech is a breeze in rye and a clatter of sickles. The bell over shattered marble becomes a bell over barley. This is where a lot of city has gone during post-Roman urban decline, not vanished, just commuted to the countryside. The old Villa Rustica didn't die. It leveled up into a manor with hedges for borders and oaths for locks. If the town looked hollowed out, the fields look fuller than ever. And yes, by evening you'll see smoke from Hillfort hearths pricking the skyline like punctuation. You can feel the myth versus reality debate under your boots. People didn't flee in terror to become hermits. Many simply followed their stomachs and their landlord's protection. A manor offered seed, a plough team share, and a hedge against raiders, literally. In return, a couple of days' labor each week, rent in grain instead of taxes in coin, and loyalty when horns sounded. That bargain siphoned bodies from deserted forums into furrows, turning shrinking cities into seasonal service stations. By harvest, the town is half empty. By winter, it's a crowded walled core, only with muddy boots at vespers. Walk the manorial yard, and you'll hear economies clicking into place. Smith's shoe oxen, where advocates once quoted law. A steward tallies sheaves with the same focus a curator now lends the basilica scales. Rents awaits, not denarii. Barley honey, a piglet in Michaelmas, a bolt of cloth in Candlemas. The hollowed-out civitas didn't become a ghost town. It became the market end of a farm contract. When coin goes shy, contracts grow legs. Peek at the big house, and you'll spot ruins reused with farmer's bravado. Portico column props a granary roof. A threshold cut from broken tiles keeps rats from a pantry. The Lord is less Caesar than crisis manager, part fence buyer, part winter planner, part militia H.Calm. A chapel tucks into a former dining room because salvation travels better than furniture. You get why people sign on. The fields promise lunch tomorrow, and the walls promise enough tomorrow to keep planting. Protection explains the new commute. On calm weeks, families sleep in hamlets, reduced from old villa clusters, their doors smelling of smoke and soup. When rumors sprint, raiders, wolves, a tax team with long memories, Everyone retreats behind the manor palisade or back to town. You watch the sunset from a byre and understand how a region becomes a heartbeat. Out, in, out, in. Meanwhile, the city's dry fountains blink at an empty noon, waiting for Saturday's fair. Agriculture itself changes the skyline. 2 and 3 field rotations paint hillsides in stripes. One green, one gold, one resting under weeds that bees adore. Orchards colonize the amphitheater. Vineyards crawl over moss-softened stones. Legumes nurse tired soils like kindly aunts. The bishop blesses rain. The steward blesses timely weeding. Both bless fence repair. Your ears pick up the soft politics of gates and hedges. Who grazes where, and why that goat thinks paving stones a salad. Meet the people who make the math hold. Tenants, call them colony if you like, bring time and bags. Cotters bring hands even if they lack oxen. Slaves survive inside this system, but with different bargaining power. Women run dairies and books, often better at both than the steward on damp days. Children herd geese and absorb weather wisdom faster than catechism. Everyone knows the bell schedule, whether it hangs in a church or a byre. Trade bends through these fields like a stream that forgot a straight line. Peddlers carry iron pins, salt, and news. Monks trade parchment for cheese. A tanner lifts a cloak and apologizes to noses. The town's silent colonnades host a weekly exchange, yet much of the deal-making starts under hedgerows. A cart creaks past with planks sawn from a derelict bathhouse and no one blinks. Timber is timber and winter is a critic. Ruins reused isn't vandalism, it's survival with receipts. Law follows the bread. Fewer curials, more manor courts under an elm, with a steward translating custom into verdicts everyone can swallow. Fines are paid in grain. Insults are measured by how much time they cost at harvest. The bishop still arbitrates the sharp stuff, but the first line of order is your neighbor's eyebrows. Compared to distant empire law, it feels like a user-friendly update. Bug fixes arrive at next market day. Culture doesn't go forsaken, it relocates. Feast days braid, plowing songs with hymns. Saints' processions loop from chapel to field boundary stones and back. Weddings swap marble atria for barn-light romance, straw confetti included. Funerals become lessons in fence repair, and recipes for keeping grief busy. You'll see carved fragments set into chapel walls, not for aesthetics, but for the way light catches them at dusk. Memory nests inside usefulness. If you're thinking, so the countryside stole the city, hold that thought. The flow runs both ways. Millstones, nails, and the rare imported trinkets still come via town. Contracts get blessed there, and winter sermons keep peace from fraying. The manor keeps bellies full. The town keeps stories straight. It's a relay race, not a theft. On a quiet night, you can hear both hearts beating. One in fields, one behind walls, and they're in rhythm more often than not. By the time dusk turns the furrows purple, you'll catch the outline of the next shift. Roads are tired, bridges moody, and caravans shorter than they used to be. So how did people keep moving goods, news, and hope across this patchwork of abandoned Roman towns and fresh hedgerows? The answer comes with hoofbeats and canvas, traveling fairs, way stations, and a new kind of road culture that makes the emptied-out stretches feel stitched again. One bell, one stall, one story at a time. You first hear the road before you see it. A hum of hooves, creak of axles, canvas knocking like loose shutters in a breeze. Between abandoned Roman towns, the old pavement survives in shards, broken tiles and potholes stitched with brush and good intentions. Wayfarers steer by bells and smoke. The bell over shattered marble in the walled town behind you, smoke from hill-fort hearths ahead. In this age of post-Roman urban decline, the highway didn't die. It fragmented and learned new tricks. Merchants don't hunt straight lines, they surf safe ones. You walk it and feel the continent as a set of pulses rather than a spine. Myth versus reality moment. Couriers didn't vanish into forests forever. They traded speed for predictability. Day hops from shrine to farm to walled core only, sleeping where the gate still answers. Bridges are half legend, half local brag. Where the great arches fell, villagers stretch plank causeways that groan like old men telling good stories. Ford masters point out stones with sticks and charge a toll in eggs. You cross and understand the new geometry. Fewer miles, more agreements. Enter the fairground when it wakes. Canvas sweating dew, chickens protesting capitalism, the sweet sour bite of ale and horses. Travelling fairs are the new deserted forums, temporary cities that rise with trumpets and vanish with receipts. A monk's tent sells parchment beside a smith's forge, throwing sparks on damp grass. Spices sit in cones that look like small volcanoes about to erupt in stew. You hear 5 languages and 6 price systems before lunch. On good weeks, the hollowed-out civitas at the next stop borrows this noise and remembers how to grin. Track the paper behind the clamour. Weights and measures live under an awning where a priest and a reeve share a stool. One blessing scales, the other fining liars. Coin is motley. Imperial leftovers, clipped flans, local tokens, so barter handles the awkward silences. A bolt of cloth for a pig, a jar of salt for shoeing, a promise written on a reused shard from a bath wall. The economy didn't empty out. It changed currencies into conversations. You're learning to count with your nose and your appetite. Hospitality drives like a cartwheel, spoke to spoke. Monasteries become way stations, where the traveller's moss-softened stones glow with candlelight instead of moss. A lay brother logs arrivals in a tidy hand. A porter swaps road rumours for bread. The infirmara spots frostbite before pride admits it. Pilgrims blend with peddlers so easily you stop trying to sort them. The road's safest passwords are I'm hungry, and I help. Where Roman milestones lean like tired men, locals straighten them into fence posts or grind them into quern stones. Ruins reused again. Practical as ever. A saint's cult can redirect traffic the way an aqueduct once did. A relic means pilgrims, pilgrims mean stalls, and stalls mean guards who prefer predictable trouble. Overnight, a hamlet reduced from a villa sprouts a tavern, then a farrier, then a gossip network that beats any courier. By next season, it's a named stop on 3 routes and a habit you can break. Not every stretch is soft focus. Bandits don't wear costumes. They smell of hunger and wet leather, and they know bends in hedgerows like favourite verses. That's why companies form at river crossings, 10 strangers who walk together until the next walled course swallows them. Cartwheel breaks, 6 hands lift. A rumour breaks, 6 heads decide. Protection has become portable, and you'll feel safer beneath a ragged banner than beneath a crumbling arch. Back in town, the silent colonnades moonlight as logias for itinerant stalls. On market day, the dry fountains serve as notice boards layered with wax tablets and scratched slates. Lost ox found buckle, safe ford 2 days east. Goats on paving ignore the news entirely, which, honestly, keeps everyone humble. When canvas comes down, the wind returns, leaves skitter and the plaza. Remembers being deserted until the next bell calls commerce out of its tent again. Road maintenance is now a crowdsourced sacrament. A guild that isn't a guild of carters patches ruts with brush. A bishop blesses a new footbridge whose railing is 3 altar rails in exile. A lord contributes nails, because nails are cheaper than refugees. None of it looks imperial, all of it works. The urban contraction taught people to repair the path they actually walk, not the road on a map. You'll catch yourself measuring distance not in miles, but in favours owed. Culture learns to fold itself. A troupe performs a morality play beside a stall selling eels. News from a distant king arrives as a song, catchy enough to carry through 2 valleys. A weaver dyes wool with woad while explaining saints' days to a spice seller, who explains pepper to a shepherd, who explains weather to everyone. In a world dotted with ghost towns, the fair is a memory stick you can pitch and strike, copying stories from place to place without anyone saying, download. The road also teaches timing. Travel in winter when ice grants fords courage. Travel at dawn, when the fog is a curtain thieves dislike. Travel on feast eves, when every gatekeeper is too busy praying to haggle. You plan your week by bells. The town's bellow over shattered marble for start. The monastery's bell for lodging. The hill fort's horn for maybe skip this shortcut. Rhythm replaces empire as the thing that keeps you moving. By dusk, as stalls collapse and the last cask thumps onto a cart, you feel the thread that ties forsaken stones to living hands. The path isn't a line but a loom. Towns, manors, fairs, and shrines, weaving a fabric strong enough to catch falling people. And just when the night smells of trampled time and cooling iron, a messenger rides in with parchment sealed in thick wax, summoning merchants to a new charter market, and hinting that lords, bishops, and burghers are about to codify all this improvisation. That's your next turn. Charters, privileges, and the birth of towns within walls that don't apologize for being new. You feel the change before you read it. A herald nails a parchment to a post under the silent colonnades, and the crowd leans in as if warmth could be read. A charter, ink, instead of empire, promises market days, fixed tolls, and the right to build shutters that face the street. For a place half grown from ruins reused. That's oxygen. Where the forum once lay deserted, the parchment calls artisans back like a bell. You can almost hear the dry fountains clear their throats. Here's the myth versus reality. Towns didn't resurrect themselves out of nostalgia. They were negotiated back into existence. A lord trades privileges for rents. A bishop trades feast days for peace. Merchants trade risk for walls. The walled core only expands a notch, swallowing lanes that goats were using as policy. The text names, weights, fines, and who cleansed the street after slaughter day. Bureaucracy never tasted so hopeful. You watch faces soften, rights smell like fresh bread. Guilds arrive the way geese land, noisy, organized, and hungry. Smiths swear to honest iron, bakers to honest loaves, weavers to widths. No one can cheat with sleeve tricks. They adopt odd saints and adopt odder hats. In a hollowed-out civitas that once felt emptied out, guilds are civic muscles, mutual aid when fire bites, funerals when winter bites harder, and a voice when toll collectors forget their own charter. You'll recognize the beat. Protection by promises, not spears. Streets get rules because ankles deserve rights. No broken tiles dumped by night. No dye vats where wells dream. No fish offal within nose shot of the bishop's porch. Markets relocate from the nave to a proper square, with stalls chalked into rectangles. Even a bickering pair can obey. The deserted forum grudgingly remembers how to host a crowd that isn't goats. A new pillory appears, which is either progress or decor, depending on your conscience. Smell the crafts waking. Panners claim the downwind quarter. Your eyes can confirm why. Fullers beat cloth to the drum of gossip, and a glassmaker coaxes colour from sand like a quiet miracle. Under eaves pressed into place with moss-softened stones, apprentices learn to set rivets without smashing thumbs. Shops sprout signs, a boot, a key, a fish, because literacy is not required to find dinner. You catch yourself smiling at competence made visible. Money grows manners. Minted Bractiates jingle with a thin music that still buys nails. Coin scales sit beside the alderman's seat like judgment on a chain. When coin runs shy, credit steps in wearing a wry grin. Tally sticks, sureties, a scribe who knows your worst harvest and writes around it. The urban contraction reversed by ledger lines. You can feel the town's pulse in its receipts. Nothing dramatic, everything decisive. Watch the skyline tilt. A market cross lifts into the square. A new guild hall shouldered from salvaged ashlar rises over a lane that used to be forsaken at dusk. On the hill, the smoke from Hillfort hearths thins. Less refuge, more beacon. because the town below can now keep a night watch sober. Timber cranes give the place a purposeful creak. If stone could purr, these moss-softened stones would. Law moves in where rumour used to nap. The charter names a court day. The bellman rings it with that famous bell over shattered marble. The aldermen listen on benches smoothed by anxious cloaks. Fines now fund bridges instead of someone's nephew. Widows' claims don't vanish in a forest of shrugs. When punishment has receipts, revenge retires a little. You can literally hear fewer knives arguing with the dark. Strangers become neighbours by schedule. Monday hides menders and mat makers. Wednesday smells like onions and contracts. Friday belongs to fish and forgiveness. On feast, eves the square hums like a hive, pilgrims, peddlers, and locals braiding news into a net that catches even shy truths. The town stops being a ghost of itself and becomes a habit. Predictable, sturdy, almost smug. Habit, in history, is half of freedom. Not everything gleams. A plague can still pinch. A bad frost can still write hunger on as many faces as a scribe can't count. But resilience grows rituals. Grain loaned in spring, repaid in smiles after harvest, guild boxes opened without speeches, processions that lay laurel on wells and broom on awful corners. Even in derelict cloisters recycled as workshops, a painted fragment peeks out, and no one hammers it flat. Memory becomes the town's second wall. Look down as much as up. New paving stones push back at mud, yet you'll still see goats on paving, nibbling at dropped kale like auditors of housekeeping. Gutters run, finally. Bridges get railings that weren't once someone's tomb. You notice where the silent colonnades now lean into arcades with shutters and laughter. When the wind comes off the river, it smells less like abandonment and more like broth. And just when you think you've mapped the rebirth, a bell announces a second charter. A commune this time, naming consuls, militia, and the right to mint without flinching. That document will teach the town to speak in we, to tax itself without sulking, and to dream of towers taller than yesterday's fear. Which nudges us forward. If charters knit streets, cathedrals, and workshops will knit souls and skills, stone by stone, song by song, until the abandoned Roman towns learn to be something else entirely, without forgetting how they were made. Walk into the yard behind the new guild hall, and you'll hear a language that never went completely silent. Chisels on moss-softened stones, hammers tapping time like choir boys with calluses. The master mason sketches arches on a board, made from ruins, reused door lintels. His apprentice holds compasses older than his grandfather. This is how abandoned Roman towns relearn muscle memory. Pattern traced, block squared, line plumb. You smell lime, wet wool, and bread from a bakehouse that rents the wall's sunny side. Cities come back through hands before they come back on maps. Art with quarries. The empire's perfect ashlar is rare. Your town works with what it has: fieldstone, salvaged cornice, altar blocks flipped and squared. Myth versus reality again. Recycling isn't decadence, it's competence. A half-crumbled portico becomes foundations. Spare, broken tiles fill vault cores like terracotta confetti. You watch the master test stone with a hammer's kiss and a frown. When he nods, everyone breathes. The wall will stand through 2 winters and a rumour. Cathedrals aren't built to erase the past. They're built to shelter what survived it. Under the nave's rising ribs, you still see silent colonnades from the old forum pressed into service as arcades along the close. Pilgrims trace letters on reused slabs, while merchants haggle 3 steps away. The dry fountains outside will run again, slow, honest spouts fed by a new cistern instead of a dead aqueduct. A city is a compromise you can pray in. Listen to the site meeting: mason, carpenter, smith, glazier, all arguing politely over inches. The carpenter smells of oak chips. He'll lift trusses that make the roof sing in high wind. The smith tempers cramps and ties, a quiet insurance policy where eyes can't reach. The glazier holds up a mock-up, saints in Warden wineglass, like sunlight learning a new alphabet. A foreman from the hollowed-out civitas counts wages with finger-notched tally sticks. Even the goat that wanders in from goats on paving gets a laugh instead of a curse. No one schools everybody. The apprentice bruises his thumb and learns to keep it. The journeyman eyes a crack and hears it before it speaks. The master adjusts a string by a hair and moves a century. You help haul a block that used to be an inscription. Now it's a threshold locals will cross with muddy boots and dignity. Ruins reused is less about nostalgia than about continuity. The past pays rent, and that rent keeps rain out. Scaffold chatter is civic therapy. Up here you see a town that was once emptied out, knitting itself, lane by lane, back into something that hums. The square fills, the deserted forum sulks a bit less, a new market crossroads, shade you didn't know you missed. From this height you can sight the smoke from Hillfort hearths and not feel small. The hill is no longer refuge, just neighbor. You whisper thanks to the rope that holds more than your weight. It holds the season together. The bishop blesses cornerstones, sure, but he also blesses payroll. A build of this size keeps flour in bellies and gossip out of knives. Quarrymen buy boots. Carters fix axles. Widows let rooms to apprentices who snore like saints. When rain halts work, the workshops pivot. Carvers polish capitals in the cloister walk. Glaziers solder by candlelight. Scribes copy contracts on scraped parchment. The town refuses to be forsaken because too many hands are busy remembering it. Auto returns the sound of normal. Without an imperial aqueduct, you improvise. Spring houses uphill, clay pipes downhill, a chain of cisterns that turn dry fountains into patient ones. The mason lines basins with crushed brick and lime. Algae won't boss this town so quickly again. Kids shriek when the first trickle arrives. Adults pretend not to. You sip and taste stone, rain, and relief. Infrastructure is just faith with receipts. Guild drama keeps the edges sharp. Carpenters argue about timber rights. Masons about wall lines. Bakers about oven smoke trespassing into choir practice. The Charter's court hears each case on a bench made from the amphitheater's stage. Fines become planks and pews. The walled core only grows by a street, then two, then a suburb with hedges that don't feel like fear anymore. You realize law doesn't have to be imperial to be majestic. At dusk, the worksite becomes a classroom. A foreman teaches a kid to read by tracing yard marks. A glazier names colors like fruits. The smith lets a child ring the anvil and feel a town's heartbeat echo. High above, a mason chalks a little fish behind a stone because he believes buildings listen. That night, a bell over shattered marble tells time for people who finally have plans that stretch past winter. Of course, not everything sings. A scaffold slips. A storm barges in sideways. A derelict vault collapses because yesterday's mortar lied. The next morning you sweep, swear, and schedule. The city doesn't lose its nerve, just some bravado. Late antique deurbanization taught everyone humility. Rebuilding teaches endurance. You tie a new knot and keep climbing, because roofs don't lift themselves and hope won't either. When the first mass happens under a half-finished roof, you stand in the aisle and feel the draft pour at your ankles. Incense climbs through gaps that will be glassed by spring. Bread breaks beside tools that will hang up by harvest. The choir's echo bounces off stone from 1,000 inscriptions, all of them happily out of context. And out in the square, a canvas stall opens on cue. Onions, candles, and a rumor that the bridge downstream will be finished before snow. That's our next turn. How crossing water changes everything, and how towns once reduced to hamlets learn to lean on rivers again, until even ghost towns find their way back onto charts. Stand on the bank at first light, and the river talks before anyone else does. It smells of cold iron and wet reeds. It carries twigs like messages, and it keeps secrets about towns reduced to hamlets upstream. In an age of post-Roman urban decline, water became the road that didn't quit, even when milestones toppled and pavements cracked into broken tiles. Ferries took over where arches fell. Rafts stitched markets that were otherwise emptied out. You're watching a new spine grow. Flexible, muddy, stubborn. It's not imperial, it's practical. Myth versus reality time. People love to picture Europe as a chessboard of ghost towns after the Empire. But the boats kept moving, flat-bottomed, bossy little things, with sacks of salt, wheels of cheese and news wrapped in oiled cloth. Monks learned timetables the way soldiers once learned drills. Boatmen learned saints by their riverside shrines. A bell over shattered marble rang in the walled core only, then echoed from a ford where a ferryman swore the water was friendlier than his brother-in-law. The river cared nothing for theories. It cared about current and competence. Bridges return like teeth in an old smile. First, a timber trestle blessed twice as hard as it's nailed. Then a stone pier stitched from ruins reused. Altar blocks flipped. Moss-softened stones squared. Inscriptions pretending to be geology. Carpenters and masons argue over flood marks, scratched on posts by grandfathers who didn't own parchment. A bishop raises subscriptions with sermons about mercy, crossing to market. When the first cart rattles over and doesn't drown, even the silent colonnades feel a little less sarcastic. With a bridge comes a toll, and with a toll comes a ledger that can afford more bridge. A reeve measures wheels, a priest blesses honest scales, and the guild of boatmen grumbles, but keeps working because ferries still own the night and the fog. This is urban contraction reversed one receipt at a time. A cut from the toll repairs the quay. A slice buys chains for the next high water. A bit sets aside arms so winter doesn't turn the riverbank into a forsaken campground. Bureaucracy becomes buoyancy. Quays sprout where dry fountains yawned. Timber piles thud into silt. A crane creaks like a giant thinking. Barrels kiss planks with hollow thumps you feel in your knees. Traders prefer predictable bruises to unpredictable bandits. Fishwives claim corners, the way senators once claimed benches on deserted forums. You buy a herring that still argues with the air, and you realize a hollowed-out civitas gets its appetite back at the waterline first. Mills change the soundtrack from gossip to industry. A water wheel starts to hum, and suddenly, flour happens on time. Fullers beat cloth to a rhythm. The river refuses to forget. A smith's trip hammer borrows muscle from current. That wheel is a promise. Bread will be less of a lottery now. Children race to watch foam bloom from paddles. Elders nod, hearing prosperity's quiet voice again. The town's derelict edges draw a little closer to the quay as if to listen. Rivers remember, though, and their memory is mostly about floods. The new bridge endures a test each thaw, ice nudging piers like bored oxen. The quay counts floodboards like rosary beads. Shopkeepers haul goods to lofts while the bell over shattered marble tolls, a caution everyone already knows by smell. Afterward, ruins reused rescues things again. Collapsed barns become gabions. Sacrificial fences become driftwood somewhere downstream. You learn to call this maintenance instead of tragedy. It helps. Culture follows the current as reliably as cargo. A saint's day upriver sends pilgrims down in boats decorated with greens. A market downstream advertises dyes that turn winter into theatre. Minstrels ride deck to deck trading songs for soup. Even goats on paving get drafted into ceremony, garlanded at the quay while kids clap. The river becomes a bulletin board people actually read with their feet. Security shows up in the uniforms of men who prefer steady pay to heroic graves. A lord posts watch on the bridge to keep tolls honest and knives bored. A commune hires marshals who recognize trouble by hat, not accent. Smoke from Hillford hearths is still there on the ridge, but it signals hearths with chores now, not alarms. When the night watch calls hours down the quay, the water answers with a slap that sounds like agreement. Behind the scenes, engineering turns luck into habit. Silt is coaxed rather than cursed, diverted into shallows where reeds knitted into new ground. Fish weirs are mapped so barges don't swear new saints. Moorings get labelled so visiting skippers stop pretending ignorance. A charter amends itself to name bridge keepers by title, which means blame has a shelf life shorter than a spring flood. It's late antique deurbanization in reverse. Specific people fix specific things on specific days. By now you can smell the river in the bread and hear it in the church echo. Trade routes bend back through the reborn crossing. The deserted warehouse becomes a granary. The silent colonnades finally host chatter that isn't pigeons. The walled core only opens a second gate facing the quay, and suddenly, town includes boats as citizens. You count more windows lit at dusk, and fewer doors barred at noon. The map changed because timber and stone learned to cooperate with moving water. And for the next turn of the story, tilt your head and listen inside the mills and on the scaffolds. Beneath the river's thrum, there's another hum beginning to dominate afternoons. The drone of lathes, the rasp of planes, the whisper of parchment. Once bridges and quays hold, hands itched to make more than flour and rope. Workshops loom along the waterfront, and beside the cathedral close, turning drifted timber into furniture, spun wool into markets, and scribbles into contracts. That's where we're headed next. The craft explosion, benches everywhere, and how a place once emptied out discovers it can export not just grain but skill. You notice the change when a cart arrives lighter than it left, and somehow worth more. It carried wool out and brings back words, charters wrapped in oiled cloth, a seal box rattling like polite thunder. In a world rebuilt from ruins reused and moss-softened stones, paperwork is the new masonry. A notary's bench under the silent colonnades pulls neighbors the way dry fountains once did. You lean in, smell wax and lamp smoke, and learn that a clause can hold a bridge together longer than a rope can. Start with the job title. A notary is part scribe, part referee, part locksmith of promises. He taps a quill, asks names in a voice that could settle goats, and turns breath into ledgers. Myth versus reality. People didn't become saints of memory overnight. They hired one. He copies a sale on parchment made from the same sheep you nodded at yesterday, then ties it shut with ribbon and law. In post-Roman urban decline, trust got tired. Writing gave it a chair. Monasteries become vaults with gardens attached. A prior opens a chest, and out slides the town's memory. Rent lists, bridge accounts, gifts to altars, even that argument about a hedge that ate a footpath. This is the cartulary, a book of receipts that refuses to die in winter. Where deserted forums no longer shout law in marble, the cloister whispers it in ink. You can almost hear the bell over shattered marble count beats, while a scribe counts lines. Walk through a scene you'll see 100 times. 2 neighbors, 1 boundary, 3 witnesses, 1 notary. They stake the field with a broken amphora neck and a thorn bush, because paper loves landmarks, but rain doesn't care. So the notary writes in redundancies, from the elder willow to the stone, with a cross to the ditch that smells of mint. If a river shifts or a goat on paving eats your mint, the clause still points north. That's how shrinking cities keep large memories. Seals our theatre with teeth. A merchant warms wax over a taper, presses a matrix, and the crest cools into authority you can touch. It's the opposite of emptied out. A crowd in miniature, a whole hollowed out civitas agreeing in one circle. You feel the weight of that little lump. It's heavier than it looks because it carries tomorrow across winter. Break the seal without right, and even friends frown like bishops. Credit turns from rumor into grammar. Before, you borrowed grain with a handshake and a Saint's Day deadline. Now you sign for sacks, pledge a strip of vines, and name 2 guarantors who aren't your cousins. Tallies notch what coin can't cover, and everyone sleeps better because arguments become arithmetic. In a landscape reduced to hamlets, the sentence "we owe after harvest" can travel farther than a cart can, provided ink travels with it. Property stops being what I can fence and becomes what I can prove. Widows' rights get written where shrugs used to sit. Orphans' shares are traced like river bends. Mills and quays have owners even when floods pretend otherwise. A town once called Forsaken discovers it can defend itself without lifting a spear, just a page. That's not romance. That's fewer knives after dusk. You will never look at parchment the same way again. Language itself starts to split the bill. Latin keeps the bones of law. The street keeps its jokes in the tongue that fits in market stalls. A good notary speaks both, translating A as witnessed by these noses into clauses the bishop can bless. Under the silent colonnades, you'll hear a deed read twice. Once for heaven's file, once for the people who actually have to move the fence. Literacy here isn't snobbery, it's plumbing. Even ruins learn to read. A derelict arch becomes a scriptorium window. Broken tiles line a chest that keeps mice from the archive. A slab from a bathhouse is scraped into a palimpsest where a cancelled tax becomes a new bridge account. Runes reused again, this time for memory. You run your fingers over ghosts of letters and think, we are literally rewriting the city. You're not wrong. Law crowdsources itself. Peace charters name where knives must nap. Market statutes fix bread weights so guilds stop shouting. River bores number moorings so fights have nowhere decent to stand. The commune's seal grows familiar, pressed on fines that pave, on grants that plant, on wills that keep cousins kind. When the smoke from Hillfort hearths drifts at dusk, it smells less like alarms and more like supper, because the valley agreed on paper at noon. Notaries also become storytellers by accident. A lease mentions the house by the dry fountain and saves a landmark no pilgrim would write down. A boundary names the stone where the old road whispers, and suddenly you can find the empire's thread in weeds. Writing turns ghost towns into citations, lets moss-softened stones keep working as witnesses, and trains the next generation to look for history not only in marble, but in margins. And here's the twist you'll like. Once a town learns to bind promises with wax, it starts binding time with calendars. Market weeks, feast cycles, school terms, tax quarters. The walled core only stops reacting and starts planning. You feel it in your bones. Stability makes curiosity affordable. Which tees up the next turn? Schools and songbooks, scholars and shop kids learning their letters over ledgers, because the moment a place remembers itself on paper, it starts asking what else it could learn and who should learn it first. You hear it before you see it. The steady rasp of planes, the thock of mallets, and shop laughter leaking into lanes that used to be deserted forums. Benches breed like rabbits. Joiners, turners, bowiers, saddlers, each staking a claim under eaves made from ruins, reused beams. That smell? Oak shavings and lamp oil, with a side of soup from a kettle the guild shares. The river brings timber. The charter brings confidence. The walled core only suddenly feels too small for its own ambition. This is how a hollowed-out civitas learns to export skill, rather than excuses. Walk a street at mid-morning, and your senses become accountants. You weigh a knife by its balance, not its shine. You price a chest by how the lid whispers shut. A weaver's shuttle blurs. A fuller's mallet keeps rhythm like a drummer who knows rent is due. A potter pulls a bowl from the wheel with hands that don't apologize. Myth versus reality. The dark ages were never dark in daylight. They were busy. Even moss-softened stones feel brighter when hung with dyed wool and brass buckles that remember polishing songs. Raw stuff arrives humble and leaves with swagger. River barges cough up planks that become tables steady enough for berths and arguments. Fleece turns into cloth that can shrug off 3 winters. Pig iron learns manners under a smith's temper. The quay, once flanked by dry fountains, now stacks barrels of soap, bales of linen, crates of leather goods headed upriver. A clerk scratches marks on a stick. The city's reputation stops being emptied out ruins and starts being that town with hinges that don't squeal. Guilds turn craft into choreography. Apprentices sweep, squint, and swear gently. Journeymen deliver, repair, and trade jokes across doorways. Masters haggle in the time it takes bread to steam. The box of alms opens when a bench hand breaks a wrist. The chest of fines opens when someone waters milk. A scribe posts weights and measures beneath silent colonnades, and you note the confidence. Rules on walls mean fewer knives in alleys. The bell over shattered marble times both compline and contracts. Design isn't a luxury. It's survival wearing pretty shoes. A chest's corners are dovetailed because nails snap. A saddle's tree curves because a horse's spine doesn't negotiate. A jug's lip pours without drama because dinner shouldn't become archaeology. Innovation sneaks in sideways. New looms, sharper shears, clever dyes, spread at fairs and whispered in workshops. Some secrets stay family, others become guild oaths. Artisans treat broken tiles like graph paper. Sketch, test, repeat, then build something that doesn't care about poetry and still makes it. Listen to export routes, learning your name. A Manitou Valley's over once plows with iron shoes that won't sulk. A monastery downriver orders windows that colour prayer. A Lord's Reeve commissions locks because theft is a love language everywhere. Carts rattle out through the gate, splash the ford and vanish toward reduced to hamlets, where benches are dreams, not furniture. In the evening the carts return with wool, hides, resin and gossip that pays in foresight. Ill is the coin that doesn't clip. Craft rearranges neighborhoods, the way rivers rearrange sand. Smelly trades drift downwind like polite guests who know themselves. Quiet ones cluster near schools, where children memorize saints and fractions. A lane of Bowyers sleeps beside a lane of Fletchers, because supply chains like short walks. Even goats on paving learn detours, stepping around drying cloth as if they'd signed the charter. You can map the city by smells now. Oak dust, wet leather, hot pitch, yeast. That's a civics course. Your nose will pass. Failures happen, and they're cheap if you're clever. A kiln sulks and turns a week's pots into grey size. A beam splits with a noise you never want to hear again. A batch of dye pretends to be blue and confesses to being swamp. Yet the machine of many hands forgives. Shard becomes fill for a key. Split beam becomes stools. Swamp dye finds a customer who calls it fashion. Late antique deurbanization taught thrift. The craft boom turns thrift into style points. Markets return to the square, like a chorus that learned harmony. Stalls line up under makeshift awnings hung from ruins, reused hooks. A guild steward weighs bread while the alderman smiles and doesn't look bored. Out-of-towners finger your hinges, your buckles, your glass, and nod the way buyers nod when they plan to brag at home. Someone starts a rumor that your town's knives keep an edge, even when onions lie. 2 weeks later, a caravan arrives to test the rumor with stew. This is how ghost towns become destinations without changing their mailing address. Education goes practical without losing wonder. A mason's mark doubles as a child's first letter. A tally stick teaches subtraction, the way hunger teaches patience. A salter in the scribe's shop becomes a workbook for measuring margins that won't embarrass you. In workshops, masters call mistakes lessons in a tone that makes apprentices believe it. When the bell over shattered marble rings for a fire drill, half the street rolls out buckets in the time it takes a joke to land. Safety is a curriculum too. Craft even edits politics. A town that exports hinges insists on contracts that don't stick. A guild that feeds widows insists on road repairs that arrive before winter does. A quay that pays for bridges insists on guards who weigh knives with their eyes, not their moods. The charter you saw posted months ago grows commentaries like ivy, and none of it feels like decline. Urban contraction taught people to huddle, making taught them to point outward. By dusk the benches go quiet, but the pride doesn't. Tools get kissed into their hooks, shavings get swept like breadcrumbs, the street won't eat, a cat yawns on a warm plain. The air tastes like tin and thyme, and the hollowed-out civitas purrs under its breath. Somewhere beyond the gate, smoke from Hillfort hearths climbs in peace, neighbours not alarms. And just as the lamps bloom, you notice a different kind of traffic, not carts now, but words, seals, notaries, letters moving faster than wagons. That's where we turn next. Paperwork with teeth, notaries, cartularies, and how a place that once measured itself in stones starts measuring itself in clauses that outlive winter. You feel the classroom before you find it. Warm wax, chalk dust, and the hush that follows a bell. Under silent colonnades, a bench becomes a school the minute a notary opens his box and a child stops fidgeting. Letters are scratched onto shards of broken tiles, then copied onto wax tablets that squeak like mice. You're taught to read bread before Byzantium, because lunch is persuasive. In a hollowed-out civitas, literacy smells like lamp oil and hope. The bell over shattered marble sets the pace the way an aqueduct used to. Cathedral song schools do double duty, music for worship, grammar for work. You stand by the choir screen and watch boys mouth Latin like it's bread dough they're learning to knead. The choirmaster taps a pointer and explains why notes matter to roofs. Rhythm keeps hands together on scaffolds and in stalls. He hums, and you feel the nave answer back like a memory. Hymns make nouns sticky, so market rules don't drift. In places once called ghost towns, melody teaches the law to breathe. Monastic classrooms teach with gardens and margins. A monk traces letters while bees argue over time. He makes you recite the alphabet between rows of leeks. The scriptorium smells of vellum and vinegar, ruins reused as desks, moss-softened stones keeping parchment flat. You copy a psalm on lines ruled by a hair, then add numbers for tolls and wheat. It's late antique deurbanization in reverse. The field and the page finally share a fence. When the dry fountains outside trickle again, your handwriting steadies. Guild schools bloom because workshops hate waiting on luck. A smith's apprentice learns weights and fractions before he is allowed a hammer. A weaver's child does tables to the clack of looms. The master hangs a hornbook by the door, like a tool, and finds anyone who can't read hot. You practice your mark until it becomes a signature with elbows. In a quarter once forsaken, the word receipt starts to feel like a lullaby. Education turns apprenticeships into elevators. Women teach quietly and everywhere. A mother counts loaves, dowries, and promises with a speed that embarrasses many clerks. A brewer writes yeast schedules on a slate and guards it like scripture. Midwives keep notebooks whose stains are stories and whose recipes are life. You learn that a walled core only still has thresholds women cross first and last. The house is a classroom that grades you every morning. Even goats on paving learn from the broom. Texts arrive patched like roads. A leaf of Terence comes wrapped around salted fish. A fragment of law hides under spice. A sermon borrows a line from Virgil with a wink. The schoolmaster shrugs. Myth versus reality is a game the past plays with copyists. He tells you to trust the parts that earn trust in practice. When a charter cites your ledger's neat column, you understand citation as survival. Writing stitches abandoned Roman towns back into conversations they thought they'd left. Notaries moonlight as teachers because contracts need readers. He drills you on witness, boundary, and debt until your tongue stops tripping. Then he takes you to the deserted forum. Has you read an inscription aloud and ask what the missing letters say? You guess. He nods, and the wind flips leaves where senators once yawned. That's the exam. Can you repair speech the way masons repair arches? In shrinking cities, restoration is a language class. Libraries don't look like palaces. They look like trunks with careful locks. A prior opens one and lets you touch spines that feel tired and proud. Margins host the town's autobiography. Rent tallies, birth notes, a doodled fish with a date. You copy the best bits onto wax and the wax onto memory that won't drown. The archive uses ruins, reused for shelves, and smells like a storm that learned to be polite. Paper becomes the city's second wall. Traveling teachers arrive with satchels and gossip. One knows Arabic numerals and draws them like magic. Then proves why, saves time. Another sings you a map of the rivers so you can count days by verses. A third trades riddles for lodging and leaves behind a trick for measuring timber without climbing ladders. In a world once emptied out, visiting mines refill rooms faster than grain. Smoke from Hillfort hearths means a bed tonight, if you can teach a useful line. Discipline tastes like ash when you're 12, but it keeps fire small when you're grown. The school whips your pride with grammar until your contracts stop wobbling. The choir slaps your rhythm until your crews haul as one. You burn a stew once and never again. You misread a digit once and pay twice, then never again. Education is just expensive mistakes paid forward in cheap practice. A town learns the same way and stops tripping the same routes. Festivals become report cards you actually enjoy. Corpus Christi turns into a parade of guild banners spelled correctly. A Saint's Day ends with a play where jokes land and morals stick. You see the derelict corner of the square filled with benches, books, and patient elders who love questions too much to go home. The hollowed-out civitas discovers that learning is a spectator sport. Laughter turns into policy more often than anyone admits. And when the bell rings at dusk, you close your wax tablet and catch a new habit. You're planning tomorrow. That's the real diploma, measuring the day ahead, not just surviving it. You check the time by the bell, over shattered marble, count deliveries by the tide, and promise yourself to ask the mason about arches at noon. Which points us forward to a different teacher altogether. The clockwork of hours, bells, and markets. The choreography of time that will make your rebuilt town feel not just alive, but in tune. You notice a rebuilt town is really a schedule wearing stone. Time used to hide in aqueduct pressure and imperial payrolls. Now it speaks through bells, shop shutters, and stew that refuses to burn twice. In a hollowed-out civitas, the first authority you hear each morning is the bell over shattered marble, ringing prime across silent colonnades that once judged lawsuits by shadow length. Crowd that once looked emptied out wakes in pulses, bakers before dawn, tanners after, scribes at mid-morning when light behaves. The day's a braided rope, and every craft grips its strand. Bells stitch everything, because sandglasses lie when you stare at them. Canonical hours, prime, terce, sext, none, become public metronomes even for people who only wander into church to avoid rain. You check bread by terce, meetings by sext, and whether your kid is late by none. In places shaped by post-Roman urban decline, sound replaces empire. A town that shrank to a walled core only learns to expand in minutes instead of miles. Even goats on paving learn the bell that means market scraps now. Markets inhale and exhale on cue. The charter pins days to the square the way nails pin shoes, and the deserted forum turns lively 3 times a week, as if obeying a tide chart. Thalls fold with compline, because curfew is a cousin of mercy. Carts roll at dawn, because bread sulks if you don't. Myth versus reality. There's no timeless medieval drift. There's choreography. A seller who misses prime sells to pigeons, which are the rudest accountants you'll ever meet. Monks keep the long clock, and the town borrows the habit. In a cloister garden, you watch a brother check a sundial scratched on moss-softened stones, then adjust the bell rope with a precision a ship's navigator would envy. On cloudy days, a candle clock does the job, wax-marked like a ledger and burned like a plan. The rhythm flows downhill from cloister to quay. Flour mills purr louder at sext. Weavers' looms clatter just after none, and the quay boss times unloads by vespers, so barrels stop rolling before gossip starts. Curfew is time made into wall. At dusk the gate creaks, and the walled core only shrinks to the circle of its own lamp glow. Curfew bells say, keep the fire polite, and store your knives where your temper isn't. Night watch calls the hours in voices dry as old bread, letting you know you're safe enough to sleep. Late antique deurbanization taught fear. The bell teaches proportion, alert, not panic. Somewhere beyond, smoke from hill-fought hearths fades from warning to weather. Workshops sink like a choir that finally learned breath control. The smiths quench hisses just as the fuller's mallet rests, so steam doesn't pick fights with damp cloth. The glassmaker fires early when the air is honest. The notary schedules deeds right after Mass because witnesses behave best when they've recently promised God to stop lying. Clock you can't see hums behind the lanes. Even the dry fountains feel less retired when buckets clack in a sex-time queue that actually moves. Unch's policy. The town learns that hearts and tempers hold a charge for about 3 hours, and then everybody needs peace. Guild rules stagger meal times so the square doesn't become a riot of spoons. The baker opens again at none for those who work through prime. The alewife's bench is placed where the watch can pretend to be surprised. In shrinking cities that once looked depopulated, hunger management is urban planning with onions. Travelers measure their courage in bells. Leave at prime, cross the ford before sext. Hit the next world core only by vespers. Ignore the recipe and you'll nap with hedgehogs. Bridges post hours to keep carts from arguing mid-span. Ferries stop when the river's humor dips. Even fares move like migrating birds. This saint's day here, next saint's day there, stitching reduced to hamlets into a calendar that rescues distances from despair. If the bell is late, the road listens and waits. Paperwork respects clocks, because temper doesn't. Court meets between terce and sext, so fines can become errands instead of grudges. Rent is due at Michaelmas, because grain exists then. Tolls close by Compline, so the reeve can get home before his wife starts composing psalms about his floor. In a world of ruins, reused and broken tiles underfoot, predictability becomes luxury. The bell over shattered marble starts to feel like central heating for the mind. The city's new soundtrack even edits weather. When rain bullies the sundial, the sacristan's hourglass and a tinker's water clock make an unlikely duet. When fog swallows streets, the watch beats time on a drum, so the key doesn't walk into itself. The silent colonnades throw echoes that help you count steps. The derelict theater's skeleton becomes a wind gauge you read by ear. You start to understand why old poems obsessed over hours. Time is how you steer when maps flinch. Not everyone loves the leash. A shepherd grumbles that bells can tell a ewe from a cloud. A poet insists inspiration ignores terse. A carpenter mutters that wood moves to its own clock. The town indulges exactly as far as bridges don't fall, and bread doesn't sulk. Myth versus reality, yet again. Medieval time isn't tyranny, it's consent with whistles. When the watch tests the curfew horn, half the lanes grin. They help set that note. By night's edge, when matins whispers like a secret and ovens yawn themselves awake, you feel it click. Time turned abandoned Roman towns into metronomes sturdy enough to teach trust. Schedules wrapped the hollowed-out civitas the way walls once did, and mornings stopped being improvisations. And just beyond that last bell, another kind of clock starts up. The soft percussion of shutters, the hush of straw, the lull of footsteps fading, pulling you toward the next piece of the puzzle. Sleep, lamplight, firewatch, and how a place that finally runs by day learns to survive the long, tricky night without setting itself on fire. You learn a rebuilt town by its darkness first. After curfew, the walled core only becomes a lantern constellation, thresholds glowing like low stars, while lanes sink into velvet. Under silent colonnades, footsteps sound too loud, so you shorten your stride and keep your cloak close. The bell over shattered marble has traded trade talk for timekeeping, counting the hours between supper and sleep. A place once emptied out by day now practices quiet survival by night. Every wick a promise not to become a bonfire. You start reading walls the way sailors read weather. Fire is the old enemy of new manners. Households ration flame. Rushlights for gossip. Tallow for chores. Oil for prayers. Because fuel is dear and neighbors have opinions. You bank the hearth. Wedge the flue with broken tiles to tame sparks. And set the poker like a cross your grandmother swears works. Myth versus reality. People did not live by moon alone. They lived by 1,000 tiny flames, each supervised like a toddler with ideas. On windy nights, the hollowed-out civitas tastes of ash and caution. The night watches choreography with boots. 2 by 2 they drift past quays and closes, listening for trouble disguised as laughter. They check chords on shop shutters, nudge sleeping dogs, and swap insults with alley cats who think they're aldermen. A horn hangs ready where the street meets the square, and the guard can rattle the parish to its feet quicker than envy spreads. When the horn does blow, buckets converge on the dry fountain, because everyone knows where water waits, even when bravery forgets. Architecture becomes a safety manual. New timbers sit on stone sills, not mud. Oven mouths point away from neighbors. Lanes widen where old Rome pinched. Cistern lids get locks that don't argue. In quarters once derelict, the commune mandates tile roofs because thatch has too much imagination. Ruins reused do their part. Thick Roman walls become firebreaks, and a retired bath's brickwork embarrasses sparks into dying. You sleep easier when moss-softened stones keep statistics on your side. Inside, sleep is scheduled like a harvest. Families stack on pallets near the warm wall. Apprentices snore under benches. Infants get the spot farther from drafts because fevers love doorways. You wake once at midnight for the old first sleep. Pee in a pot that scowls back, and check embers because habit outruns dreams. In shrinking cities, insomnia is a civic service. Someone is always awake when embers decide to rehearse rebellion. Outside, the city grows ears. Boards creak. Rats audition for sainthood. Shutters mutter. A fox noses through goats on paving, and gets reviewed by 3 maidservants with brooms. Somewhere upon the ridge, smoke from Hillfort hearths climbs like punctuation, ending the sentence, "No raids tonight," with a calm period. The dark is not empty. It's busy with subtle jobs, cooling, drying, resetting temper. You begin to like it. Moonlight invents another town. In the deserted forum, columns cast chessboard shadows and the ground remembers sandals. Lovers claim the spot where courts once yawned. Widows paste debts into prayers. A notary with insomnia rewrites a clause in his head and forgives the cat that edits his thoughts. Abandoned Roman towns looked romantic by day. At night, they look practical, their silent colonnades offering shelter to feelings that don't thrive under stalls and shouting. Danger hunts by rumor, more than by teeth. Thieves prefer festivals, not fog. Knives like ale, not moon. Wolves talk a big game and eat chickens. The watch knows this and spends most energy on preventable foolishness. Unattended lamps, ovens bragging after hours, straw too close to flues. Myth versus reality again. Medieval nights weren't a horror reel. They were a spreadsheet of risks managed by people who wanted breakfast. The walled core only is a classroom with darkness for chalk. The church teaches fire etiquette along with theology. Candles stay low at vigils. Thuribles swing wide of tapestries. Lanterns carry lids and rules. Dish of water sits under the tower ladder because sparks adore altitude. The sacristan counts wicks like a reeve counts sheaves, and no one sneers because last winter's attic incident still smells like a lesson. When the bell over shattered marble tolls a requiem, it also tolls a reminder. Grief and negligence are cousins. Don't invite either. In life is its own nocturne. Doors stay bolted, but bargains breathe late. A carter's tale about a ford carries more calories than stew. A peddler sells needles to a widow who will mend until none. The tallow stink loses to onion and ale, and the hostler's laugh declares this quarter neutral ground. By the back door, a pot of sand waits for accidents. On the beam, a charm waits for flukes. Ruins reused lend lintels to thresholds that have seen worse and expect better. Not all light comes from flame. Phosphorescent mold paints a low halo on cellar beams. The river throws a blade of silver up the quay. Frost writes a quiet script on roof tiles that the baker reads before cockcrow. In lanes once forsaken, neighbors learn each other's silhouettes and moods, and the night becomes a neighborhood rather than a void. The hollowed-out civitas isn't braver than you thought. It's better trained than you assumed. By pre-dawn, the town inhales. Ovens wake, mills clear their throats. A sleepy novice pulls the bell rope, and the day begins walking in on stocking feet. If the night went well, the square smells of damp stone and smug relief. If it didn't, you'll see ash lines where buckets erased a headline. Either way, the rhythm resumes. And as you sip something hot at first light, Your ear will catch a different nocturnal story curling under the day's bustle. Coughs behind shutters, candles at odd hours, small funerals slipping through moss-softened stones. Leading us toward the next question a reborn town must answer with both science and prayer. Sickness, sanitation, and how a city that learned not to burn. You can tell a town is growing up when it stops treating illness like weather and starts treating it like plumbing. Morning air smells of bread and vinegar because someone had the bright idea to rinse stalls before terse. The bell over shattered marble doubles as a hygiene reminder, calling sweepers to lanes that once sat emptied out till goats handled it. In the corners of the hollowed-out civitas, cesspits get lids, gutters get gradients, and the watch finds anyone whose barrel leaks into neighbors' sleep. It's not glamorous. It's survival with mops. Myth versus reality first. Medieval people went nose-blind. They knew bad air hurt, even if they named it miasma instead of microbes. That's why fishmongers get a windward street, tanners get sent downwind, and butchers learn the scenic route to the river. When they fear Melanchi als the sandwich she sourced, they told Permacus Costano Compigui. Market boilos pin filth days to the calendar, the way charters pin tolls. You watch a reeve stride the silent colonnades like a health inspector with a salter, tapping lids and egos with equal zeal. Water decides the odds. The aqueduct's gone, but wells get lined with moss-softened stones, and dry fountains become patient ones, thanks to covered cisterns that keep frogs from running for counsel. A boy lowers a bucket, listens for the clean clink, and grins like he's learned a spell. A chalkboard near the spout lists rules. No hides, no dye, no washing babies where bread waits. The scribe posts fines under a reused arch, ruins reused as a notice board for lungs. Cesspits are secrets you manage like savings. Householders hire night soil men who arrive with moon and shovel, carting danger out through a postern gate to fields that need it. When a pit collapses under a floor, the carpenter swears in 3 languages, and the notary writes a clause. Nobody will forget again. In quarters once derelict, new timber sills and stone thresholds keep wet from teaching rot to speak. You learn fast that dryness is a civic virtue. Hospitals don't look like palaces. They look like intelligent kindness. The leper house sits outside the walled core only, with gardens, music, and rules about distance that ache but help. Inside town the infirmary hums. Beds near a cloister walk, broths that taste of thrift and time, a lay sister with a ledger that knows who ate and who lied. Pilgrims bring relic tales and foreign remedies, monks bring bed charts and soap. Between them, a city learns to lower fevers and raise odds. Doctors carry books and noses. One swears by Galen, another by observation, both by clean air and good drains. They prescribe sleep, broth, and work that doesn't insult your lungs, which might be the best medicine you can afford. Apothecaries bottle prudence. Vinegar washes for hands, rosemary for rheums, rue for bravado. On market day you'll see them under the silent colonnades, weighing hope on a brass scale that squeaks like honesty. When pestilence comes, the choreography tightens. Fairs pause, gates mind their manners. The deserted forum hosts cordon stalls for essential trade, with gaps big enough to shame elbows. Clergy move processions outside, airing both souls and lungs, while guilds stagger shifts to thin the benches. A cart rumbles to the east meadow where fresh trenches wait, grim, organized, necessary. The town writes a new rubric in chalk and prayer, and for many it works better than panic ever did. Burial teaches urban design faster than fashion does. Graveyards slide outside walls, charnel houses stack neatly behind discreet doors, and churches keep a strict ledger of who sleeps where. Ruins reused again. A bathhouse wall becomes a cemetery boundary. A fallen cornice marks a path for mourners' feet. Broken tiles, capped graves, so rain keeps its opinions to itself. You'll walk there at dusk and notice how tidy grief makes people. Animals are either policy or chaos. Pigs in lanes become fines on parchment. Pigeons become lunch for falcons that roost on the tower like aldermen with wings. Goats on paving still sneak headlines, but even they learn market hours, sweeping scraps with 4 stomachs while brooms back them up. Dogs get tagged by collar and temperament. In a civic game of inches, fleas lose when fur gets washed and straw gets changed on schedule. Smell is the town's early warning system. Vinegar at dawn says the tanners behaved. Pitch at noon says coopers are sealing barrels. Sage and smoke at vespers says soup. Not fever is the reason for heat. A sudden whiff of sweet rot sends the watch to a back alley cistern, where Silt decided to hold a festival. The bell over shattered marble rings a quick pattern that means, bring shovels, not swords. Hearing becomes health. Even classrooms join the fight. Schoolboys copy clean hands onto wax tablets with the same seriousness they copy psalms. Guild wards practice bucket lines till laughter replaces panic. Midwives teach boiling as liturgy. A scribe illuminates a margin with a saint holding a ladle, and nobody laughs. Because the picture fed 3 streets last winter. Literacy starts to smell like soap. Late antique urbanization gave towns small rooms. Education makes them breathable. And because illness is never just physical, festivals get repotted rather than cancelled. A saint's day moves from the nave to the meadow. Stalls stretch thinner. Music faces wind. People learn to weep with doors open and to feast with plates apart. It looks odd the first year, normal the next, and traditional by the third, resilience wearing a halo, which nudges us forward to the work you feel through the soles of your shoes. Food security, granaries, mills, and winter mouth. Because a city that keeps fever at bay still has to outthink hunger when snow turns lanes into lessons. Start by sniffing the square at dawn. Warm grain, damp sacks, and the dusty sweet breath of a mill that hasn't slept since prime. In a hollowed-out civitas you survive winter with arithmetic, not heroics. Bushels in, mouths out, and losses that must stay small. The bell over shattered marble rings a pace for carts and shoulders. Nobody rushes grain the way they rush gossip. You can see how post-Roman urban decline taught frugality. No imperial dole, no magical shipments, just careful counting under silent colonnades where pigeons once held senate. If bread is politics, the granary is parliament with locks. Granaries look plain on purpose. Thick walls, few windows, floors raised on stone mushrooms to shame rats, and beams that groan like old men when the wind tests your resolve. Many are ruins reused. A bus caldarium walled in, a forum hall braced, because Roman masonry is still the best bodyguard grain can hire. You run a palm along moss-softened stones and feel last summer stored in them like a secret. A reeve chalks waits on a jam that was once a decree. Now it says, enough. That word is civilization in winter. Mills are the heartbeat that doesn't boast. River wheels thrum. Donkey gins circle with saintly patience. In a pinch, hands push querns until arms tell stories. Versus reality. People didn't starve because they were medieval. They starved when mills or math failed. So the town spreads risk. One wheel by the quay, one up the brook. One tucked behind a walled core, only gate. If flood bullies one, frost kisses another awake. Flour becomes a schedule you can taste. Inside the granary, air is an ingredient. Damp is the enemy with a polite face, so slatted vents flirt with wind, and the floor rises on piers to keep breath moving. A barley layer, then rye, then wheat where trust sleeps. Each bin holds a season's temper and a steward's reputation. Spilled kernels crunch like broken tiles under boots. And that sound is a fine waiting to happen. You learn to love tidy seams, tight lids, and the way a lantern shows no fog inside, because fog eats families. Rats are management's midterm exam. Cats wear bells like aldermen, traps baited with honesty-line shadows. A terrier becomes a civic officer with fans. When a bin leaks, a mason patches, a scribe notes, and a miller apologizes like a merchant caught napping. Even goats on paving get deputized, sweeping chaff after market, so fewer crumbs invite whiskers. In a city once emptied out, discipline is the cheapest food you can buy. Price is a weather you can measure. After harvest, grain is sown. By Candlemas it mutters. By Easter it negotiates. The council posts a just price under the silent colonnades, and the guild bakes sample loaves to prove numbers aren't theatre. Hoard if you like, but the charter's teeth show when children thin. Finest feed the alms granary. Yes, a second pile, because mercy with receipts feeds straighter than sermons alone. Law becomes bread-shaped. Bread itself is technology. Mix of grains shifts with yield. Rye for humility, barley for bellies, wheat for feasts that remind you why you fight mildew. Darters sleep like pets. Ovens breathe like choirs. Peals flash in and out with a rhythm bell's envy. In shrinking cities that once felt depopulated, shared ovens turn alleys into gossip universities, and smoke into weather reports. A good crust is proof of masonry and math. Hunger drills the town the way fire once did. Poor years teach ration cards before paper learns the word. Guilds stagger meals, so benches don't faint. The infirmary keeps barley broth like a quiet sacrament. Processions move saints past granary doors, because hope rises better near full bins. Myth versus reality again. Fasting sometimes meant policy, not piety. You taste both and learn not to judge what you don't have to survive. Countryside and city braid their nerves. Manners promise deliveries by saints' days. The quay promises tolls that won't eat wagons. The town promises fair weights that don't lie by lamplight. When snow makes roads sulk, you hear smoke from Hillfort hearths, and no hamlets reduced from villa clusters are holding a line for you. In turn, you grind their grain when their wheel freezes, because reputation is an edible currency. A winter kept civil becomes a spring that trusts. Storage isn't just piles, it's paperwork with splinters. Tallies notch sacks. Seals kiss warehouse doors. The notary copies who brought what, when, and why. The math still smiled. Even a derelict wing gets pressed into service with clean boards, quick lime wash, and a cat who reads thoughts. A charter clause says, no private mills without the commune's nod, and suddenly your bread tastes less like corruption. That's not romance, that's lunch. Famine plans sit in drawers that pray never to open. Rotate stock before smugness sets. Loan grain at seed time with interest in labour, not tragedy. Feed workers fixing bridges first, so bridges can fetch food. Forbid export when geese can count ribs. When the bell over shattered marble rings the pattern everyone dreads, feet move without speeches. Fear becomes logistics. Logistics becomes mercy. Mercy becomes rumour that keeps knives asleep. By the first thirsty days of spring, you feel the city breathe longer. The dry fountains whisper again. Sacks lighten for planting. Ovens flirt with feast breads. You realize food security didn't just keep stomachs full. It kept tempers governable, markets honest, and songs in tune. And as the bins drop to the level that makes stewards hum with relief, a different kind of hunger peers over the parapet, not for flour, but for meaning. Festivals, memory, and pride. How a place stitched from abandoned Roman towns turns surplus into celebration without forgetting hungry winter. You know a town's out of pure survival mode when it spends flour on joy. After the last cautious loaves of winter, the square tilts toward colour. Banners stitched from offcuts. The bell over shattered marble rings not for ration lines but for a procession, where deserted forums once echoed nothing but pigeons. Drums now test the stone, and the stone answers back. This isn't waste, it's maintenance for morale. Feast days braid together what post-Roman urban decline had unravelled. Guilds march by trade, each with a joke. The bishop pretends not to hear. Bakers wail colossal pretzel like a halo. Smiths carry a key taller than a novice. Weavers sew a river in blue, so the key feels applauded. Myth versus reality. Medieval festivals weren't escapism. They were contracts out loud. By cheering the miller, you promised not to starve him with haggling. by cheering the watch you promised to sleep when told. Smell tells the plot before the friar does. Fat hits griddle, spices argue in friendly voices, and the square's old dry fountains carry steam like rumour. Children streak past with sugared fingers, while elders claim benches whose inscriptions nobody can quite translate anymore. You feel the hollowed-out civitas inflate gently, the walled core only becoming porous, as visitors pour in from hamlets reduced from villas. Even the moss-softened stones look pleased to wear garlands. Rituals repurpose ruins with a wink. A triumphal arch, missing half its brag, becomes the gate of welcome. A derelict theatre hosts mystery plays, where saints outwit devils and tax collectors sit in the cheap seats. Ruins reused isn't just masonry, it's choreography. You step under a lintel stolen from a bathhouse and into a dance that remembers Athens and the last good harvest on purpose. Culture grows in cracks without apologizing. Pageantry teaches civics faster than charters do. Watch the order of march, clergy, then council, then guilds, then the rest. And count the pauses where blessings and bylaws shake hands. A new bridge gets sprinkled with water and arguments are expected to behave. A granary key is carried high like a relic so everyone remembers what saved them. Bells punctuate clauses. Cheers ratify budgets. You're sitting in a parliament disguised as a parade. Masks and reversals. Hello, misrule. Let the town rehearse its safety valves. For one licensed hour, the fool fines aldermen for ugly hats, and the crowd's laughter vents the pressure that shrinking cities store in corners. Then the hour ends. Order returns not with scowls but with relief. Versus reality again. The license to mock was part of the lock. Humor keeping hinges from squealing so knives didn't volunteer as lubricants. Food becomes a syllabus of memory. Trenches shaped like shields for a campaign nobody fought. Saffron buns for a saint who, legend swears, bribed a flood. A broth the hospital invented during plague, and now serves as gratitude, not tryish. You taste barley and policy in the same spoon. A goat on paving eyes. Your pastry like a tax officer, and steals it with the elegance of a Roman senator. Applause says the city still tolerates cleverness. Games rehearse. Labor as play. Tug of war at the key makes bucket lines faster next fire. Log toss by the gate teaches leverage to apprentices. Sack races at the granary produce falling without injury, which is its own skill. When smoke from Hillfort hearths drifts as evening cools, the ridge stops being a threat and becomes a backdrop, a neighbor watching the town flex. The old geography of fear becomes scenery for confidence. Songs file the minutes of the day in melodies you keep. A ballad stores the toll schedule better than a posted slate. A round counts the mills upstream by rhyme. A hymn pins the market's rules to a refrain that outlasts arguments. Under the silent colonnades, a blind fiddler teaches a new chorus about abandoned Roman towns that refuse to be ghost towns, and suddenly the crowd hums a thesis. Music makes continuity feel like dancing instead of duty. The countryside doesn't watch. It participates. Carts arrive with wheels ribboned, pigs polished to comic dignity, cheeses stacked like white bricks for a war you plan to eat. Manors send wrestling champions and a grudging compliment about the town's bread. Private feuds go on pause, because public feast is a ceasefire you can taste. That's not naivety, it's expensive wisdom cheaper than a winter of sulks. Sunset softens the edges, without letting vigilance nap. Lanterns lace the lanes, the watchposts a discreet cordon, so joy doesn't drift into tinder. The infirmary ladles broth to anyone who forgot lunch while dancing. You notice that even celebration respects the urban contraction. Fireworks are a poem spoken outside the gate. Bonfires sit atop damp earth, and far from eaves. The bell over shattered marble keeps time like a kindly sergeant. Safety is a habit wearing flowers. And the morning after tells you whether you celebrated like grown-ups. Sweepers clear the square before terse. Gutters run clear. The deserted forum, for once, doesn't look hung over. A scribe copies the day's donations. The guild returns borrowed benches. And a child finds a carved token in the dust that will sit in a chest until someone calls it heritage. That's your next quiet turn. Memory on purpose. Saints, shrines, civic legends, and the birth of our story. How a town that stitched itself from shards learns to curate the past without letting it chain the future. You realize a town finally trusts tomorrow when it starts curating yesterday. The first sign isn't a museum. It's a small altar wedged into moss-softened stones, a saint's fingerbone behind glass that smells faintly of beeswax. Pilgrims drift in with the same quiet you hear under silent colonnades, tracing letters on recut slabs saved from deserted forums. This isn't nostalgia for abandoned Roman towns. It's insurance. When life has been edited by late antique deurbanization, you keep receipts, bones, plaques, songs, so the world can't tell you were never here. Shrines turn crossroads into memory anchors. A spring once fed an aqueduct. Now a niche over the dry fountains holds a painted panel whose eyes follow market day like a patient aunt. People pin ribbons that smell of smoke and rosemary, leaving notes that outlast gossip. Each offering says, "We've survived water that failed and taxes that wandered." You watch children learn routes by saints' names instead of broken milestones, and a hollowed-out civitas starts to feel like a map you can read without squinting. Legends arrive late to the meeting and somehow chair it. A mason swears a lost legion camped on the ridge. A shepherd adds that their cook taught the village to salt properly. A scribe unable to help himself writes it down. Myth versus reality is less a cage match than a duet. Stories are how people file facts they don't want to misplace, especially in shrinking cities where archives once lived in marble and now live in marginalia. You learn to listen for the useful lie, the part of the tale that keeps the bridge repaired. Spolia becomes scripture with fingerprints. A lintel from a bathhouse, ruins reused, now crowns the guild hall door. Someone carved a tiny fish on its underside, and apprentices kiss it for luck before exams. A column drum, half buried near the quay, gets painted with names of ships and prayers against rot. Piety and policy hold hands in public. When the bell over shattered marble rings, you can feel centuries stacking, not slipping, and the stack is strangely warm. The archive stops being a trunk and becomes a room. Parchments breathe behind shutters, seals hang like moons in orderly constellations. A notary reads a donation aloud, his voice dust-soft and persuasive, and the town nods as if tasting bread. Lists of bridge repairs sit beside tales of goats on paving that ate the mayor's hat. Both are true where it counts. Paper turns emptied out stretches of time into paths you can retrace with dry feet. Civic processions convert streets into textbooks. On the patron's feast, banners pass the places the banner paid for. A key plank here, a school bench there, a widow's roof no one mentions but everyone sees. The route lingers through walled core-only alleys and past derelict corners deliberately, because forgetting is expensive. You march, you sing, you point. That pointing is pedagogy. A city that nearly forgot itself learns to memorize out loud. Even the countryside rehearses the script. At the edge of town, a stone cross marks where villa fields were reduced to hamlets. Names are chalked at harvest and washed clean by Advent. Upon the ridge, you glimpse smoke from hill-fort hearths, and think not of alarms, but of cousins with strong opinions. Fairs pin their origin tales to stalls, and a miller keeps an oar from the ferry that bridged 2 hungry winters. Memory becomes a commons no one wants to fence. Craftspeople trap time inside objects that behave. A weaver hides dates in selvages, a smith stamps bridges into buckles, a carver sneaks the market square into a misericord under the choir. When you sit on history that smirks. This is continuity with a sense of humour, and it works better than sermons at 3 in the afternoon. You start spotting the pattern everywhere, broken tiles relayed in shop floors spelling out old street lines, like ghosts with excellent manners. The town learns what to forget as carefully as what to keep. Cracked statue loses its face to make a keystone. A blood feud is retired to a shelf where charters sleep. An unfair toll is sung about for a season and then dropped backstage. Curation isn't hoarding, it's urban editing. After post-Roman urban decline, that discipline is gold. You find yourself repeating a pleasant refrain. Keep the walls, keep the wells, keep the jokes. Everything else can audition. Tourists, yes. Call them that. Test your story's spine. Pilgrims count relics. Traders count reasons to return. A monk from far away sketches the silent colonnades and notes that your moss-softened stones smell of time. You see yourselves through borrowed eyes and revise where the tale snags. A city is a manuscript with fingerprints. A good edit makes it easier to love. Even ghost towns up the valley borrow your plot, raising shrines to promise their children. This isn't just a campsite with better roofs. Only changes how you negotiate tomorrow. When you draft a new charter, you footnote the famine that taught you Clause 3. When you repair the bridge, you inscribe the flood mark like a teacher's red line. A plaque near the quay thanks the nameless who hauled in sleet, and the nameless hear it. Gratitude is policy disguised as poetry. The hollowed-out civitas hardens into a place that won't apologize for existing and won't panic when winters clear their throats. By twilight, you can read the town in one slow turn. The shrine candle guttering in a niche, the bell over shattered marble catching the last light. Children hopscotching over letters on a salvaged slab. Goats on paving failing to care about historiography. It's ordinary and it's miraculous, which is the whole point. And as lanterns prick the lanes, you'll feel the next question arrive like a tide at the quay. If stories can hold a city together, what do you do with the edges, frontiers, marches, and the roads that lead out, so that leaving and returning both keep faith with what you've built? Stand on the last rise before the fields turn to scrub, and you'll hear the town behind you breathing. Bells soft through distance, carts ticking like clocks. Ahead lies the seam where maps grow shy, marches patrolled more by rumour than by rule, hedges and ditches marking, hours with a patience empires rarely had. In an age shaped by post-Roman urban decline, borders aren't straight lines. They're living negotiations. You taste iron in the wind, see smoke from hill-fort hearths stitched along the ridges, and realize frontiers are less about fear than about rhythm. Out, trade, back, report. Cities worthy of trust, learn to listen to their edges. Roads out of rebuilt towns are agreements made visible. A mile or two of good paving dies into wagon ruts, then picks up again where a man's sense of pride or toll income keeps it honest. Waymarkers are pragmatic. A saint's shrine under moss-softened stones, a plank bridge that sings when it's tired, a thorn tree whose shadow tells you noon. You don't measure distance in miles. You measure it in safety solved, fort soundness, hedge height, who owes whom a favour this season. Between abandoned Roman towns, the thread is thin, but stubborn. Border posts are less castles than conversations. A low motte with a timber palisade keeps tools on the right side of bargains. A reef's table under a canvas awning weighs salt, vouches companions, and hears small lies that won't ruin anyone's winter. Myth versus reality. The frontier isn't a line of constant battle. It's a queue with sharp ears. On good days, the bell over shattered marble in your town answers a horn from the ridge, and you can feel subtractions and additions balancing across hills without anyone writing a poem about it. Merchants teach you how edges work. They travel in mixed companies. Cloth from the quay, iron from the upland forges, jars of fish sauce someone still calls by a Latin name. And they split at crossroads like water around stones. A chartered passport tied with a wax seal is worth 3 extra men. Where the pavement breaks into broken tiles and fern, they slow to the speed of rumour, testing tales of a bandit captain who is also a generous uncle at Easter. Out here, myth earns or loses customers. Border villages are routers in human form. Reduced to hamlets by the long centuries, they regroup around wells, mills, and chapel porches, curating news like grain. A bar of iron arrives, a plough goes out, a bride crosses with cousins singing, a steward writes a clause on a shard when parchment runs shy. You stand by a dry fountain that isn't dry anymore and watch goats on paving chew weeds between letters from an inscription nobody here can read, but everyone keeps because the stone minds its chores. Fortified farms, not just forts, keep roots believable. Curtain of hedges, a ditch with a polite frown, and a timber tower that answers questions long before knives do. These are the new gatehouses. Walls here are lower than Rome's but more talkative. They gossip with the lane, share cords with the granary, and lend shade to travelling fares. If raiders test them, they discover that a dozen neighbours who practice bucket lines by day can also twist a road into a puzzle at night. Walled core only is a tactic. The countryside's palisades are strategy. Faith follows trade and edits fear. On a hill with a view of 3 tracks, a wayside shrine keeps a lamp lit behind horn, and the niche smells like beeswax and wet wool. Pilgrims pin ribbons, carters leave half candles before hard crossings, and a clerk from town chalks a note, ford safe till sunset, below a painted saint who looks like someone's aunt. Shrines are contracts that outlived empires. When late antique deurbanization hollowed civitas into islands, these little lights map channels between them. Law gets lighter at the edge without vanishing. The communes writ names tolls, weights and fines, then bows to custom where a manor court knows the ditch by its moods. Under silent colonnades back home, statutes look polished. Out here they raid like recipes. Double this in flood, halve that in snow, stir in 2 witnesses who know how to tell truth without making enemies. The better a town writes this footnote language, the fewer ghost towns it inherits. Frontiers turn towns into students of landscape again. Your navigator's eye, trained on rivers and bridges, learns marsh grammar and heath etiquette. You watch a line of pack ponies step stones across a bog like monks crossing vespers, each hooffall narrated by a boy who knows which tuft lies. The smell changes, peat, resin, clean rot, and for a moment you hear the empire breathing through moss-softened stones, not as command but as memory. Ruins reused underfoot are still teaching balance. People leave and return with pieces of elsewhere attached. New tools, harder jokes, a way of knotting rope that saves a thumb. Markets hum a little differently on the weeks after long caravans dock. A fuller tries a foreign beating rhythm. A baker adds a spice that makes a saint's day blush. Post-Roman urban decline didn't end the world. It redistributed imagination. Deserted forums become rehearsal rooms where borrowed habits audition and either join the cast or get politely booed by lunch. Occupations at the edge produce their own folklore. Bee hunters with maps in their noses. Charcoal burners who read rain better than priests read psalms. Guides who can hear the difference between honest silence and ambush. The town learns to pay them in respect and cash because they keep ledger lines from snapping. When smoke from hill forts thickens on an odd day, these are the first to frown, and that frown saves time. Edges are early warning systems that don't run on bells. And when you finally turn back toward home, cresting the knoll where the city silhouette gathers itself, cathedral ribs, a crane asleep, the lazy glint of the river, you understand the bargain. The road out keeps your contracts honest. The road back keeps your identity warm. A place assembled from abandoned Roman towns survives by breathing with its marches. Inhale news, exhale goods, hold still long enough to mend. The map doesn't end here, it folds. And in that fold is the next beginning. Exactly the question that drew you to this story. Not just what failed after Rome, but why towns walked away, where they camped, and how they decided which stones to carry and which to leave for goats and rain. You came looking for collapse and found choreography. Roman grids didn't simply rot into ghost towns. They breathed, shrank, and reassembled. Walled core only here. A hill fort there, a ferry where the bridge failed. A market in the nave when the forum emptied out. The strongest lesson isn't cities died. It's Cities learn to be smaller without forgetting how to be cities. Silent colonnades turned into arcades with shutters. Moss-softened stones kept carrying loads. Bells over shattered marble told people when to work, pray, wash, and rest. Ask yourself, which part moved you most? The ruins reused as ramparts, the ledger that outlived a winter, or the child tracing letters on a broken tile, while goats on paving judged the onions? Which habit would make your own world sturdier? Cleaner drains, fair weights, honest schedules, or stories that tell the truth without demanding perfection? Where, in your life, are you guarding a walled core, only that deserves a gate to open again? History is oxygen when it's this close to the skin. When we face our own versions of urban contraction, economic chills, broken pipes, maps that don't match our feet, we can borrow their moves, edit without erasing, mend without mythologizing, and keep the bell schedule that makes strangers into neighbors. That's not romance. That's policy with warm hands. If this journey through abandoned Roman towns gave you new eyes for old stones, share it with someone who loves ruins, maps, and the sound of practical hope. Hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so the next chapter finds you on time. And tell me below where you're watching from and what time it is now. Let's stitch our own roots between hill fort hearths and city squares.